I grew up playing hockey and basketball. I grew up in Canada, in Toronto. I didn't play football, but watched a lot of it on TV.
Fans think The Replacements is just a funny sports movie, but the truth is shocking. Keanu Reeves has finally revealed what really happened during the making of the 2000 film. Washed-up athletes, bartenders, and ex-convicts were drafted during a 24-day NFL strike, and one of those teams went on to win the Super Bowl. So what did Reeves uncover about the real events that inspired the movie? And why has the full story left fans completely stunned? Join us as we reveal the unbelievable true story behind The Replacements that no one expected. The story was real, and it was stranger than the movie. The 1987 NFL players' strike is not something that most football fans under the age of 40 have thought about carefully, if at all. It happened early in the season, lasted 24 days, disrupted 3 weeks of games, and the league decided those games would be played regardless of who was available to play. What followed was one of the most genuinely bizarre episodes in the history of American professional sport. Teams assembled rosters out of whoever they could find on short notice, players who had been cut during training camp, veterans who were well past their professional prime, semi-pros from leagues that barely covered travel expenses, and in at least one case, a man who had recently been released from prison and showed up to sign a contract still carrying the specific energy of someone who had not expected to be anywhere but a county jail that autumn. The Washington Redskins were the team that took the replacement period most seriously, largely because head coach Joe Gibbs decided early that whatever happened during those 3 weeks would count in the standings and that he would win those games. General manager Bobby Beathard had been tracking potential replacement players since training camp, maintaining a list of the last players cut from rosters across the league, knowing what was coming. When the strike was called, Washington was ready. The team that assembled at Redskins Park during those 3 weeks was the dictionary definition of a ragtag roster. A receiver named Anthony Allen, who had been cut by the Atlanta Falcons and was between jobs when the call came. A quarterback named Ed Rubbert, who had played at the University of Louisville, gone undrafted, and was reportedly working as a bartender in New York when Washington signed him. And a quarterback named Tony Robinson, who had been the most exciting player at the University of Tennessee, been photographed on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a potential Heisman Trophy candidate, had his career derailed by a knee injury and legal troubles, and was literally digging holes for fire hydrants when Washington's general manager tracked him down and offered him an NFL contract. The Redskins were also, critically, the only team that had no regular players cross the picket line. This was Gibbs's strategy of unity. Either all of the team came back together, or none of them came back individually. That meant the Washington replacement squad was playing without any ringers from the regular roster, against teams that sometimes had half a dozen recognizable NFL veterans on the field who had broken the strike for their own reasons. In the final replacement game, a Monday Night Football matchup at Texas Stadium, the Scabskins, as the fans were now calling them, faced a Dallas Cowboys team that had dressed Randy White, Tony Dorsett, and Ed Too Tall Jones, Hall of Famers on the other side of the line, playing against men who had been digging holes and pouring drinks 3 weeks earlier. Washington won 13-7. Tony Robinson, the former Heisman candidate who had come straight from serving a sentence, played the last 3 quarters after Rubbert was hurt in the first and completed 11 of 18 passes for 152 yards. The crowd at Texas Stadium carried the Redskins coaches off the field when it was over. The Washington replacement team went 3-0. Those 3 wins gave the regular Redskins a strong enough division lead that when the strike ended and the regular players returned, they were already positioned for a championship run. The team finished 11-4, defeated the Minnesota Vikings in the NFC Championship, and beat the Denver Broncos 42-10 in Super Bowl 22, producing 35 points in the second quarter alone. Doug Williams, the regular starting quarterback, who had been out on strike the entire time the replacements were playing, became the first black quarterback to win a Super Bowl. It was one of the most historic NFL seasons of the modern era, and the men who had made it possible by winning those 3 games in October were sent home without Super Bowl rings, without playoff shares, and without acknowledgement. Some of them had been digging holes before the strike. Most went back to whatever they had been doing afterward. They waited 31 years. The Washington organization finally gave them rings in 2018 after an ESPN 30 for 30 documentary called Year of the Scab forced the football world to reckon with what had been done and not done. One of the replacement players in the documentary pulled out a fake ring he had made for himself because he could not wait any longer. "It's not quite the real thing," he said, kind of a metaphor for the whole experience. The replacements, the film, understood that feeling completely. It had to, because that feeling was the whole point. The true story was already extraordinary before Hollywood got to it, but the decisions made in turning that story into a film produced an extraordinary chapter of its own. Why did Gene Hackman almost say no? Why did Keanu Reeves train like he was actually trying to make a roster? And why does the movie exist at all, given that the NFL wanted nothing to do with it? The NFL said no, and that made the movie better. The first obstacle the producers of The Replacements encountered when they tried to make a film inspired by the 1987 strike was also the most clarifying one. The NFL refused to cooperate. The league would not license its name, its team names, its logos, or any of the branding that would have allowed the film to present itself as an officially sanctioned account of what had happened 13 years earlier. The reasoning was not complicated. The 1987 strike had been a painful and politically complicated event in the league's history, involving labor relations and replacement workers and a level of institutional brutality toward its own players that the NFL was not eager to see dramatized on screen and released to mass audiences. The story was too close to real events that the league still had complicated feelings about. The answer was no. What the filmmakers did with that refusal was creative and decisive. Rather than fight the decision or water down the story to make it acceptable, they built a fictional NFL from scratch. The team in the film is the Washington Sentinels. The league they play in has a name that doesn't match the real one. Every uniform, every logo, every stadium graphic, every team name in the background of the game sequences was designed and manufactured specifically for the production. The Washington Sentinels do not exist. The fictional league that suspends 4 games does not exist. The scoreboard numbers, the broadcasting graphics, and the sideline equipment were all original. The result was that the film had to be so meticulous in creating a complete, believable professional football world that the audience never felt the absence of the real logos. The invented context was more immersive than a licensed one might have been, because every element had been built to serve the specific story being told rather than imported from a pre-existing brand identity. The game sequences were filmed at what was then called PSI Net Stadium, the home of the Baltimore Ravens, which had opened only 2 years earlier in 1998. The production assembled the entire company, cast and crew, at the Baltimore Arena downtown and bussed everyone over at halftime of a real Ravens game. When Keanu Reeves and Gene Hackman ran onto the field at the head of the cast in costume, the crowd that was already there for the actual NFL game erupted. Reeves later described it as one of the greatest moments of his career. The bright lights of a professional football stadium, a crowd of tens of thousands roaring, the weight of the pads and the helmet and the jersey, and for a moment, the specific illusion that what was happening was real. The NFL would not give them a franchise name. What they got instead was an actual NFL stadium full of actual fans having an actual reaction. That is a different kind of authenticity, and by most accounts, it was the kind that served the film better. John Madden and Pat Summerall appear in the film as themselves, calling the action during the Sentinels games. Their presence is the most explicit connection between the fictional football world of the film and the real professional game that the NFL would not officially acknowledge. And their willingness to participate gave the film's game sequences a specific layer of credibility that no amount of production design could have manufactured. When Madden is commenting on a play involving Shane Falco and the Washington Sentinels, the audience hears it through the same filter as a real NFL game, which is precisely the effect the filmmakers were pursuing. The NFL said no to everything except the 2 men whose voices represented football more completely than any logo. The fictional football world was built. The stadium was secured. Madden and Summerall were on board. The remaining problem was finding 2 actors who could carry the weight of a film that needed to be genuinely funny and genuinely emotional at the same time. The story of how Keanu Reeves and Gene Hackman ended up in the same movie together involves a financial sacrifice that tells you everything you need to know about who Keanu Reeves actually is. The pay cut that changed the movie. By 1999, when The Replacements was in development, Keanu Reeves was the biggest action star in the world. The Matrix had opened in March 1999 and had not simply been a hit, but had fundamentally altered how cinema audiences and film critics understood what an action film could be. He was coming off a franchise that had just redefined the genre. His asking price for a project of any kind was correspondingly enormous. The Replacements was a mid-level sports comedy from Warner Brothers, with a budget that made sense for a project of that ambition. But it did not make sense for a cast that included Keanu Reeves and a two-time Academy Award winner from the generation above him. Neither of those people could fit inside the budget together. One of them had to cost less. The filmmakers wanted Gene Hackman to play Coach Jimmy McGinty. Hackman had won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for Unforgiven in 1993. After winning Best Actor for The French Connection in 1972. He was one of the most respected actors of his generation, was widely regarded as one of the finest in the sports movie genre. The problem was that Hackman had specifically decided not to take on another sports coach role after Hoosiers. He had done it. The idea of doing it again, particularly in a comedy version of the same archetype, was not appealing to him. The filmmakers pitched him on what they believed made McGinty different. Not the loudness and intensity that define most sports movie coaches, but the quietness and genuine belief in second chances that defined this one. Hackman heard the pitch. He remained unconvinced. He said no. Keanu Reeves then did something that Hollywood actors almost never do. He offered to cut his own salary substantially enough that the production could afford Gene Hackman. Reports at the time described the reduction as potentially as large as 90% of his fee, though the exact figure was never confirmed publicly. What was confirmed was that he made the offer, and that the offer was accepted, and that Gene Hackman agreed to do the film. Reeves later explained his reasoning in terms that were straightforward. He admired Hackman enormously. He believed Hackman's presence would make the film significantly better, and he was willing to accept less money to make that happen. It was not the first time he had done this. He had taken a similar pay reduction on The Devil's Advocate specifically to afford Al Pacino in that film. The pattern suggests not a single generous moment, but a consistent philosophy. The quality of the work matters more than the size of the paycheck, and a film is better when the right people are in it, regardless of what it costs to put them there. Hackman, for his part, was generous in his assessment of Reeves on set. One of the most exciting things about the film for me is to see the maturation of Shane Falco's character as played by Keanu, he said during production. I like working with young actors, and he's become one of the best. Keanu is hardworking, highly professional, and always prepared. The financial arrangement produced the casting combination that defines the film. And then the two men did something that nobody who has seen The Replacements would fully expect from a movie that contains a scene where a lineman vomits hard-boiled eggs in a huddle. They both played their roles absolutely straight. Hackman approached Jimmy McGinty as though the film were a serious drama about second chances in professional sport. He was disciplined, focused, and in every scene visibly committed to a character who genuinely believed in the people around him. He did not wink at the camera. He did not acknowledge the comedy happening in his peripheral vision. He was a real coach, in his own performance, regardless of what Reese Ifans was doing at the far end of the bench. Director Howard Deutsch noted that Hackman's seriousness functioned as the emotional anchor around which the comedy could freely operate. The jokes were funnier because one character was not laughing at them. Faizon Love, who played one of the replacement players, described working with Hackman with an economy of words that his castmates largely echoed. Hackman played it completely serious. Reeves had the same instinct about his own character. But the choices Reeves made in preparing for the role of Shane Falco went considerably further than most actors would be expected to take for a PG-13 football comedy. What he actually put his body through to play a quarterback is a story in its own right, especially given that his body, specifically his neck, was considerably more vulnerable than anyone watching the finished film would have guessed. What Keanu actually did to play a quarterback. The choice to take Shane Falco seriously was made before production began, but the preparation for the role started from the outside in. Reeves decided that if he was going to play a professional quarterback convincingly, he was going to learn how to be one. He worked with a former NFL quarterback and a college coach for 3 weeks before filming began. The training was not gentle. It was structured to approximate what actual players go through in a professional preparation camp, which means it was daily. It was physically demanding, and it left no room for the corners that are generally cut when an actor is simply learning how to fake a skill for the camera. He also, during practice, took real hits. This is the detail that lands differently when you know the context. Several years before the replacements, Reeves had undergone cervical spine surgery to address a fusion in his neck. The surgery had been successful. His recovery had been successful. But a cervical fusion changes the parameters of what the area around it can absorb. During training camp for the film, he took a hit that produced a stinger injury, a nerve compression event that creates a burning or stinging sensation in the arm and shoulder and can, if the underlying vertebral situation is fragile, precede something considerably worse. For an actor who had neck fusion surgery and then chose to train like a professional footballer, that kind of injury was not simply an occupational hazard. It was a reminder that the preparation he had chosen was operating close to a genuine physical risk. He kept training. He studied John Elway specifically, modeling the confidence and the specific mechanics of an elite quarterback's throwing motion on the most recognizable right arm of the era. The director said afterward that Reeves had helped to keep the entire film emotionally grounded. Without him playing the character with that kind of honesty and personal investment, the comedy around him might have collapsed into pure silliness. With him at the center, the jokes worked because they existed inside a story that felt real. The results were visible to anyone who watched the film with professional attention. Reviewers who covered the athletic performance specifically noted that Reeves did most of his own on-field sequences and that his mechanics looked credibly professional, which is a genuinely unusual achievement for an actor without athletic background in the sport. The film could use wider shots and longer takes during the game sequences because the person calling the plays in the pocket was not someone who needed to be hidden. That changed what the football scenes felt like on screen. Instead of the rapid-cut fragmentation that conceals an actor's technical limitations, the replacements could let the action breathe. Jim McMahon, the former Chicago Bears quarterback who won Super Bowl 20 and worked as the film's primary football consultant, helped translate professional quarterback behavior into something the cast could perform on camera at a level that held up to scrutiny. The combination of McMahon's instruction and Reeves's willingness to take that instruction seriously produced a football film that football people who reviewed it could watch without cringing, which is not a standard achievement in the genre. The film got made, the football sequences were extraordinary, and the emotional core held together because the two men at the center of it refused to let it be lightweight. But audiences who have revisited the replacements over the years have consistently pointed to one aspect of the production that goes beyond performance or preparation, something the film achieved almost accidentally by involving actual human beings who had actual football experience. The movie's injuries, many of them, were not simulated. How does that happen on a film set? And what did it cost the people who showed up to do it? The hits were real, because the players were real. The decision to populate the cast and the football sequences with actual former professional athletes rather than actors and stunt performers was made early in the production, and it changed the character of everything that ended up on screen. Real athletes move differently than actors. Real athletes react to each other differently than people who are performing reactions. When a former NFL lineman drives a former NFL linebacker into the grass at full speed, what the camera captures is the specific physics of that encounter, the compression and the aftermath. That is not something that choreography and camera angles can fully replicate, and the filmmakers knew it. They chose authenticity over safety, in the sense that they accepted that real impacts produce real consequences, and they built their production accordingly. Stunt coordinators designed every play on the field using actual football plays as their template, because actual football plays look like actual football. Hidden padding under the uniforms absorbed some of the contact. Camera placement exploited angles that made less than full-speed action read as faster than it was. But the fundamental dynamic of the athletic sequences remained honest. There were people on that field who knew how to play football, and they played it. The result was that the game sequences in The Replacements have a quality that most sports movies do not achieve. The players look tired in the ways that people who have actually been playing football for 2 hours look tired, and they hit each other in the ways that people who are actually trying to win. The director could frame wide shots that held for long enough to show the whole field. Because the whole field was doing something worth watching, the cost of that authenticity was paid in bruises, sore muscles, and headaches. Cast members who were not professional athletes were putting their bodies through the same contact that the professional athletes absorbed routinely. Keanu Reeves had a stinger from practice. Other members of the cast had smaller injuries that accumulated across the shooting schedule, in the way that injuries accumulate for anyone who spends weeks doing the physical work of an American football season. The production never had a serious injury, and the stunt coordination maintained a safety standard that kept the risk manageable. But the choice to pursue that level of physical realism, rather than the safer alternative of tightly edited fakery, meant accepting that the people involved were going to feel it afterward. Most of them described it as worth it. The film they made looks like it is worth it. The football sequences were then edited at a pace that amplified what the physical performance had created. Quick cuts between multiple angles, close-up contact mixed with sudden wide stadium pullbacks, and the rhythm of an NFL broadcast compressed and dramatized. The editor used the footage the way a good sports producer uses live footage during a real game, prioritizing the moments of collision and emotion over the procedural elements that would read as dead time for a general audience. The result was a film where the football scenes genuinely raise the pulse, which is not something that can be achieved purely through editing if the material itself is not there. The material was there because real athletes had put themselves into real contact for the sake of what ended up on screen. The cheerleader scene was added during script rewrites. The jail cell sing-along was added during script rewrites. The hard-boiled egg scene was there from the beginning, but the game sequences worked because of what happened before the script, out on a field in Baltimore, where the preparation was genuine and the hits were not entirely simulated. The football was real enough to hold up. The casting was right because one actor gave up most of his salary to make it right. The story was drawn from actual events that the NFL itself would rather not discuss. And the lead actor approached the role with a seriousness that nobody who watches it could mistake for accident. But what does Keanu Reeves actually say about all of it now, looking back from a distance of 25 years? What has he admitted that fans were stunned to hear? What Keanu admitted and why it matters? The truth that Keanu Reeves has been most direct about regarding The Replacements is not a revelation about some hidden dimension of the production or a confession about difficulties on set. It is something simpler and in some ways more meaningful. He loved making it, not the way an actor says they loved a project as a diplomatic courtesy to the film's legacy. The way a person describes something that is connected with a genuine part of who they are. He has described the experience of running out onto the field at PSI-NET Stadium during the halftime of a real Baltimore Ravens game in full costume. As Keanu Reeves says, it was one of his greatest moments. That quote is from the production notes filed at the time. 25 years later, the feeling behind it has not been revised. He got to act with Gene Hackman on his birthday, and he has described that as one of the best things that ever happened to me. What Reeves has admitted about the film that surprises people who carry fixed assumptions about him as an actor is how seriously he took a project that most of the people around it treated as light entertainment. He made the financial sacrifice to get Hackman on board because he believed the film deserved to be better than it could be with a lesser cast. He trained like a real quarterback rather than learning how to approximate one for the camera. He sustained a genuine physical injury during preparation, near a surgically fused part of his spine, and kept training. He made the choice to play Shane Falco not as a comedic straight man, but as a person genuinely dealing with failure and the complicated emotions of a second chance. That choice, the director noted, is what kept the film from collapsing under the weight of its own silliness. The straight line through the middle of the chaos was drawn by an actor who decided the character's pain was worth taking seriously. The character of Shane Falco is a distillation of what the real replacement players actually felt in 1987, even if it is dressed up in a Hollywood redemption arc and given a cheerleader love interest and a winning season. The real Ed Rubbert was a bartender in New York who had gone undrafted out of Louisville. But he had made his peace with the fact that the professional dream had not materialized the way he had hoped. When the call came, he went. He struggled in the first game. He threw for 334 yards across his first 2 starts. He went for an 88-yard touchdown to Anthony Allen that remained the longest pass of the 1987 NFL season. He was injured in the 3rd game, replaced by Tony Robinson, and watched from the sideline as the replacement era ended. He never played another professional game. He eventually got his Super Bowl ring 31 years after the season he helped to win. The ring was real. The wait had been long. The metaphor about the fake ring one of his teammates made because he could not stand waiting any longer is as close as real life comes to the feeling the film was trying to generate. The Replacements earned a 41% critics rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an A- from audiences who actually watched it. That gap between critical reception and audience response is not surprising for a film of this type, but it is worth paying attention to because it reveals what critics were measuring and what audiences were experiencing. Critics were measuring the film against a standard of narrative originality and thematic complexity. Audiences were measuring it against the standard of whether the thing they were watching made them feel something worth feeling. The script was not original. The outcome was never in doubt, but the feeling of watching people who had been told they did not belong demonstrate that they do, even temporarily, even against everything that the professional system had decided about them, is a feeling that does not expire. The replacement players in 1987 felt it. The real ones waited 31 years for a ring that confirmed it. The fictional ones got their moment in a Baltimore stadium, while John Madden and Pat Summerall called the action, "Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever." Keanu Reeves delivered that line with a straight face and meant every word of it, and that is why it lands. The people behind the Sentinels and what happened to them. The film assembled one of the more quietly remarkable casts in early 2000s cinema. Jack Warden, who played the Sentinels' owner Edward O'Neill, was appearing in his last film before his death in 2006. He had a career spanning 5 decades that included roles in 12 Angry Men, Shampoo, Heaven Can Wait, and The Replacements, which was the final entry in a filmography that had begun when Keanu Reeves was not yet born. Orlando Jones as Clifford Franklin, the sprinter-turned-receiver with the worst case of butterfingers in professional football, gave the film its most purely comedic performance and also one of its most physically demanding ones. The extended sequences of Franklin failing to catch anything, with his hands acting independently of the rest of his body, required Jones to convincingly and repeatedly execute a very specific kind of athletic failure, which is considerably harder than it looks. Jon Favreau, who was in the process of transitioning from actor to director-producer at exactly this moment in his career, brought a specific kind of physical commitment to the character of Daniel Bateman that the film would have been noticeably diminished without. An LAPD cop who responds to any stimulus with disproportionate force and who seems to have joined the replacement team primarily because it is the one environment where his aggression is actually an asset, is a character that requires an actor willing to go further than is strictly comfortable. The fact that he was simultaneously developing the creative instincts that would eventually produce Iron Man and The Mandalorian does not reduce what he did on the field in Baltimore in the summer of 1999. He was fully present and fully committed to a role that in lesser hands would have been a single-note joke. Do you think The Replacements deserves more respect than it has received in the 25 years since it came out? And which moment in the film hits hardest for you? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.